Right now, 550 kilometers above your head, a piece of metal the size of a paint fleck is traveling at 28,000 kilometers per hour. It has no engine, no guidance system, no owner, and it's not alone. There are currently over 30,000 tracked debris objects orbiting Earth, fragments of dead satellites, spent rocket stages, exploded fuel tanks. But the tracked objects are just the beginning. NASA estimates there are over 1 million pieces of debris too small to follow and too fast to dodge. At orbital velocity, a 1-centimeter fragment hits with the force of a hand grenade. In 1978, NASA scientist Donald Kessler published a paper that most people in the space industry wished had never been written. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. At a certain point, the density of objects in low Earth orbit becomes self-sustaining. One collision creates debris. That debris causes more collisions. Those collisions create more debris. A chain reaction with no off switch. He called it a cascade. The world now calls it Kessler Syndrome. And in 2024, the European Space Agency released its annual Space Environment Report with a finding that stopped researchers cold. The density of debris in key orbital bands has already crossed the theoretical threshold Kessler identified, not approaching it, crossed it. We may have already started the clock. Think about what lives in that orbital band: GPS, weather satellites, military communications, the financial networks that process every transaction on the planet, climate monitoring, emergency response coordination, all of it sitting inside a potential debris field that could, under the right conditions, render low Earth orbit permanently inaccessible. Not for years, for generations. If you've never heard of Kessler Syndrome before, that's not an accident. And if you think this is a problem for astronauts and aerospace engineers, stay with us, because by part 3, you'll understand why this is everyone's problem. But first, if this channel is new to you, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The Doomsday Archive covers the threats science confirms are real. This is one of them. So how does it actually start? It doesn't need a dramatic moment, no rogue nation firing missiles, no catastrophic explosion. It can begin with something completely routine. 2 dead satellites drifting on crossing orbital paths, meeting at a combined speed of 15 kilometers per second. That happened already, in 2009. Iridium-33 and Cosmos 2251, 2 satellites, roughly 1,500 kilograms combined. The collision generated over 2,000 tracked fragments, fragments that are still up there, still circling, still waiting. That was one collision. One. Now consider this. There are currently over 9,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. SpaceX's Starlink constellation alone operates more than 6,000. Amazon's Project Kuiper is adding thousands more. OneWeb, Chinese state constellations, each one a potential collision point, each collision a potential cascade trigger. ESA's modeling shows that even if humanity launched nothing new into orbit starting today, not a single additional object, the current debris population is already dense enough to sustain a slow cascade over the coming decades. The physics are already in motion. But we're not launching nothing. We're launching more than ever before. In 2023, humanity placed more objects into low Earth orbit than in the entire previous decade combined. The commercial space race has no speed limit and, until recently, no traffic control. Here's what they're not telling you. The debris doesn't stay in neat orbits. Solar radiation pressure, atmospheric drag at the edges of the thermosphere, gravitational perturbations, all of these gradually shift debris trajectories in ways that are difficult to predict beyond a few days. The International Space Station performs collision avoidance maneuvers multiple times per year. In 2022, it performed 3 emergency maneuvers in 30 days. And the ISS is one of the most closely monitored objects in orbit. Most satellites have no maneuvering capability at all. They cannot dodge, they can only be hit. The trigger for full cascade could be a military test, a battery explosion on a dead satellite, or simply 2 objects in the wrong place at the wrong time. In Part 3, we're going to walk through exactly what happens to your daily life when the cascade begins. And one of those consequences, one specific thing that disappears, is going to hit closer to home than you expect. It begins with a GPS outage. Small at first, patchy coverage over certain regions. Aviation systems switch to backup navigation. Shipping routes recalculate. Nobody panics. Then the weather satellites start dropping off. Within 48 hours of a cascade initiation in the most congested orbital band, ESA models project a rapid loss of functionality across multiple satellite systems operating in overlapping altitudes. Not all at once, progressively, like a city losing power one district at a time. You're at an ATM, the transaction fails. You assume a network glitch. It isn't a glitch. The financial system processes $45 trillion in daily transactions. The synchronization layer that makes that possible runs on GPS timing signals accurate to nanoseconds. Without that signal, global financial infrastructure doesn't slow down, it stops. Think about that for a second. Not frozen accounts, not delayed transfers. The underlying timing architecture that every bank, every exchange, every payment processor on Earth depends on, gone. Within 72 hours, emergency services in major cities begin losing satellite-dependent dispatch coordination. Search and rescue operations in remote areas go effectively blind. Military communication networks, many of which still rely on commercial orbital infrastructure, begin degrading, and the weather forecast disappears. That sounds trivial. It isn't. Modern agriculture runs on 10-day weather models, supply chain logistics, flood management, wildfire prediction, hurricane tracking. All of it depends on continuous satellite data that, in a cascade scenario, simply ceases to update. You're in Chicago. It's November. A storm system is building over Lake Michigan. Nobody sees it coming. But the infrastructure collapse is only half the picture. The other half is what comes after. Because once the cascade begins, the window to reach orbit, to fix anything, to launch replacements, to send repair missions, starts closing. And in Part 4, we need to talk about how long that window actually stays open. The answer from NASA's own modeling is not what anyone wants to hear. So, can we stop it? Maybe, but the window is narrowing faster than the response is moving. There are currently 3 serious debris removal programs in active development. ESA's Clear Space 1 mission, scheduled for 2026, aims to capture and deorbit a single large debris object, a rocket adapter left in orbit since 2013. One object, years of development, hundreds of millions of dollars.
there are 30,000 tracked objects. The math is not encouraging. But here's what they're not telling you. The debris problem isn't unsolvable in principle. It's unsolvable at the current pace. Laser systems can nudge small debris into lower orbits where atmospheric drag does the work. Electromagnetic tethers can slow larger objects. Capture vehicles like ClearSpace can handle the biggest threats. The technology exists. The funding doesn't match the urgency. In 2023, the FCC implemented a new rule requiring commercial satellites to deorbit within 5 years of end of mission, down from the previous 25-year guideline. A genuine step forward. Tested at scale? No. Enforced with consequences? Not yet. And the biggest debris contributors, fragments from the 2007 Chinese anti-satellite missile test alone, account for over 3,000 tracked objects still in orbit, fall outside commercial regulation entirely. What can you do? Realistically, individual action here is limited, but awareness matters in ways that aren't obvious. The policy frameworks being written right now, in 2025 and 2026, will determine whether debris remediation gets funded at the scale it requires. Public pressure on spacefaring governments and commercial operators is one of the few levers available. If this video is making you think about who owns the sky above you, hit the like button. It helps this channel reach the people making those policy decisions. And share it, because the conversation about orbital sustainability is happening almost entirely out of public view. In Part 5, we get to the number that defines everything, the probability, the timeline, and one specific scenario that NASA quietly models as the most likely cascade trigger. It's not a missile test. It's not a rogue satellite. It's something that's already happened. Twice.
So what are the actual odds? NASA's long-range modeling puts the probability of a localized cascade event in the most congested orbital shells between 500 and 600 kilometers altitude at greater than 50% within the next 20 years if current launch rates continue without active remediation. 50% in 20 years. That's not a fringe estimate. That's the median projection from the agency that runs the tracking systems. And the most likely trigger isn't a war. It isn't a test. NASA's internal modeling identifies cascading battery explosions on aging, uncontrolled rocket upper stages as the single highest probability initiation event. There are over 2,000 of these objects currently in orbit. They're pressurized, they're old, and they cannot be steered away from anything. 2 have already exploded this decade, each generating hundreds of new fragments. Here's the deeper problem. The orbital bands most at risk, the ones Starlink, GPS, weather satellites, and ISS all share, are also the ones with the highest economic value. The commercial incentive to fill them is enormous. The incentive to clean them up is almost non-existent because the cost falls on everyone while the profit goes to whoever launches fastest. Economists call this a tragedy of the commons. Kessler called it a cascade. The result is the same. We built a civilization that depends on access to space. Then we began filling space with debris at a rate that threatens to end that access permanently, not for a decade, potentially for centuries, until orbital mechanics and atmospheric drag clear the wreckage. The irony is almost unbearable. The species that spent 60 years learning to leave the planet may be in the process of trapping itself here, not with a war, not with a natural disaster, with garbage. The window to prevent that outcome is still open, narrowly. The technology exists. The policy frameworks are being drafted. The question, the only question, is whether the urgency matches the timeline. Right now, it doesn't. Subscribe to the Doomsday Archive so you're here for what comes next. Because next week, we're covering a scenario where the threat isn't above us, it's inside us. A pathogen scenario that WHO has been quietly modeling since 2022, with a transmission profile that makes COVID look like a rehearsal. That video is coming. This is the Doomsday Archive. Tomorrow is coming. Will you be ready?